Not a lot of people know we actually opened our first and second stores while still working our day job. I think that's the crazy part about it. And we were trying to
Wow.
open our third store while still keeping our day job. And these are not like
Wow.
you can phone it home kind of day jobs, like I think these are very demanding day jobs. But that's because maybe we were just super duper risk averse. I still think we are to this day.
You're listening to Talking Taiwan with your host, Felicia Lin.
Early last year, I spoke with Boba Guys co-founders Andrew Chau and Bin Chen. At the time, Andrew had just gotten back from visiting Taiwan and other parts of Asia, so it was interesting to hear his observations. Andrew and Bin shared many great nuggets. We talked about how they got started with a pop-up shop while working full-time and how they continued to do so even after they opened up their first few stores. Other topics covered include how Boba Guys weathered the pandemic, Andrew and Bin's book called The Boba Book, and how they see boba as a way to bridge cultures. What has Boba Guys been up to since we spoke? Lots of interesting collabs with other brands, and the release of a loyalty program called Passport, which gamifies the experience through loot boxes instead of earning points that can be redeemed for a drink. Here's our interview. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone.
So, I've heard all about you guys, of course. I heard about you through Taiwanese American back when Hochi was probably one of the first people that interviewed. That's crazy, over 10 years ago now, right? And so, could we start with the basics? How did you guys first meet?
We met in San Francisco well before Boba Guys ever was an idea. We worked at this company called Timbuktu. They made messenger bags and backpacks. And we were one of the kind of only Asians in the company, at least at around our age. And I remember the very first day at work, I asked the only other Asian guy, hey, do you want to play ping pong? They have this ping pong table there. No one is using. They're piling all these bags and stuff on. And we really bonded over that. But more importantly, we bonded over just getting Asian food together during our lunch breaks. And we would learn that we actually had very similar backgrounds. I was one of the only Asians growing up in Wharton, Texas. And Andrew was one of the only Asians growing up in Woodbridge, New Jersey. So we were surprised that we actually had a very similar background. In the Bay Area, there's a lot of Asians born and raised here, and we actually shared very similar backgrounds. And that's kind of how we started, how we met well before we even started this company, Boba Guys.
Tell me about your love of boba and how that led to opening a bubble tea pop-up shop.
I'll take that one. I'll keep it short and sweet. It's just that anytime you love something or you are obsessed with something, a lot of people just turn in their passions into business. I think the real question is why do we do it full time? But we did it as a pop-up, as you said, first. And so we were thinking maybe we're going to do an apparel shop. We both came out of Timbuktu. So we thought maybe something in what you call cut and sew, which is apparel, bags, accessories. But every time we were brainstorming, it was over boba because he and I both get Asian glow. So we don't really drink a lot of alcohol. So instead of going to a bar, we actually would trek, and this is San Francisco, across the city from the Mission District, which is where he is, or Soma, which is the district I live in. And we'd go across to this place in Irving. This is 2010, 2011. So in Irving, there was one of the original boba shops. It was called Wonderful Foods. So we would actually just do a half-hour drive, which is what it is, across the city to Wonderful Foods to get boba or try different boba shops out. And lo and behold, that passion project turned into a real full-fledged kind of business. So it definitely was not what we thought we would be doing, to be honest. Mm-hmm. But it's been 11 plus years now. So we're still standing. I just got back from Taiwan. I mean, it's appropriate that I'm literally on this podcast because I was I told Ben, I said, I'll update because Ben has not gone back since he had a kid recently.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
So I'm actually the most updated. Yeah.
I was going to say the last time I was back was, in 2019, right before the pandemic. So
yeah.
I was so jealous of Andrew's trip, but how was it? I didn't even get the download from Andrew yet.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I landed about 48 hours ago.
Oh my God.
So other than me getting this cold
no.
a little bit, highlights is this. Everybody from America was in Taipei this last New Year's. There was people that people know on the podcast, I'm guessing would be like Andrew Yang and his wife, Evelyn. We did New Year's together. People don't know, Andrew Yang's this politician guy. He ran president. His wife, Evelyn, they all came to Club Core. Our friend Elroy runs Core in Taipei. And so they came out. It was randomly seeing him halfway across the world in a club because he was doing some Web3 thing that he had going on, which was awesome.
That's funny. I saw Kevin Lin posted like the Taipei 101.
We were with Kevin.
Where
Kevin Lin, for those who don't know, started a Taiwanese American, started a company called Twitch.
Mhm.
And then Kevin Lin, he invited us to his party. So it was us, Simu Liu, the Marvel guy. I won't comment about anything between China and Simu, but he loves Taiwan.
Yeah.
And our friend Jason Lee, his wife, Stephen Lim from Worth It and Watcher, he was there. His wife Tammy was there. Just a lot of friends were out there. Half of California I felt like was out there. And more than anything, it was just a lot of eating food. It was a lot of food.
Sure.
And I missed it so much.
And of course, I have to ask, did you check out bubble tea shops and things?
I did. This is really candid. Bin and I are obviously known for our candor. I'm not going to lie. I think the bubble tea scene in Taiwan is kind of dying.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I saw much more in Korea. I went to Seoul and Tokyo, and I felt like the cafe scene is a lot stronger over there. I stayed next to Yonggangjie, and usually Yonggangjie has a lot of these innovative drink shops, but I didn't see it as much this time. I see a little bit more chains. And the chains, 10 years ago, it was like Wonzo. It was, obviously like the big Taiwanese multinational chain. This time I saw a little bit of Chudan. I think I saw Yifang, but there's not many. And I don't know what it is. I was asking my friends because they said, have you checked out all the boba shops? And I said, I'm going to be honest. I think these coffee shops are a lot more prominent and I think just better than some of the boba shops. And I hate to say that, given that we're known for boba. And people on this podcast, please do not cancel us or anything. This is our own community here. I was telling a lot of my friends who are, from the island, from Taiwan. And I said, hey, there's one thing I could help with is let's think about innovation for this island. So every time I go back, there's a tech incubator that our friends run. A lot of our mentors, like Steve Chen, he founded a company called YouTube. He's Taiwanese American.
Right.
Kevin Lin, you just mentioned. They all started this tech kind of community. And I told, them, I said, if you need me, I can go back and I can help stir the food and beverage, which I think their food scene in terms of savory, the fine dining has actually, I think, gone up a little bit. But I don't know if the boba / cafe scene, is as vibrant. I felt like the talent maybe moved towards Korea and Japan.
Interesting. Yeah, I have been hearing a lot about the coffee culture, so it's not entirely surprising. Maybe there needs to be more innovation in the bubble tea space. Because I know that in your interview with Hochi that it started off as a passion project. So do you think this is a good approach to take when you're starting off a business, to treat it as a passion project and not really expect to make money in the beginning? I'm asking this because I actually interviewed a very seasoned bubble tea shop owner in New York who said that his advice to people who want to start a bubble tea business was that you should just prepare to take a loss in the first year of operation. There's really no way around that.
I think that we both have probably some comments about this. I think that the way that we did it was probably a little bit unconventional. I think people think entrepreneurs are always super rash, follow your passion at all costs. And I think that maybe because of our upbringing, maybe because of just how we were brought up, we followed kind of the traditional path. We went to great schools. We went into the corporate world. Andrew was a great marketer well before Boba Guys and Timbuktu. And I was an art director and in advertising. And so we had very great careers in the corporate track and we were climbing that ladder. And so even as we started Boba Guys and it was starting to pick up and get noticed and the pop-up shop was doing well, not a lot of people know we actually opened our first and second stores while still working our day job. I think that that's the crazy part about it. And we were trying to open our third store while still keeping our day job. And these are not you can phone it home kind of day jobs, I think these are very demanding day jobs. But that's because maybe we were just super duper risk averse. I still think we are to this day. And what it's allowed us to do is that we've been able to keep really independent. I think that We're one of the few companies, like if you think about it, you can probably count on two hands, companies that can even get to a size like ours without taking large swaths of VC money. You hear about Phil's and Blue Bottle, all those guys took like millions and millions of dollars. We didn't. You're talking to the board of directors right now. There's no like huge board of directors. It's just us. And I think that that's both good and bad. The good is that we can kind of call the shots. The bad is also that we have to live with those shots. And I think that it gives us a lot of freedom, but then there's also everything rides on that. And so, I think that yes, follow your passion. But for us, I think that we took a really unconventional route which was we try to take as much risk out of it. That is why we did the pop-up shop inside of a ramen restaurant. We didn't just put all our money on a store that we didn't know if it was going to be successful or not. And I think that that's where, it can be done. It was very, very hard. I have to say it really strained, our relationships. It strained our work. It burnt us out. It was very, very tough to do it that way.
That's incredible.
But that's the way that we did it.
Wow. Yeah. And I actually did my research before this interview. And I know that there was an interview in which Andrew said that you actually had to turn down $2 million of VC money, right?
Oh, yeah. Early days. We actually recently turned it down, a year and a half ago, we had turned down another set of incoming offers during the middle of the pandemic. As Ben said, I don't know if it's a good decision, but, it's tough. I would say to the comment, I think we had mentioned this before, but, Boba Guys, we got really lucky in that we were profitable, all the way up until the pandemic from day one. So the only reason we say that is because I don't want people to think that is normal, but I also don't want people to think it's about money as the main source of risk. As Ben is saying, I think the most of the risk that you take as an entrepreneur, who's to say if payback was 6 months, a year, 18 months, that's just a math calculation for any entrepreneur. How much money do you got and you hold on? I think the question I would pose to people listening and just to you and anybody starting anything is it's the social risk. Most of the time that we're not ready for is like the questions that we get from, overbearing Taiwanese parents. They're like, are you sure you want to do that boba shop? Your friends are like, oh, Andrew went to business school and then he started his boba shop for some random reason. So there's a lot of those. It's not negative, but they're like slights that, some people are just really sensitive and it's going to kind of hurt a little bit every time they feel like it's a slight. So you have to be pretty confident in your ideas enough that you can kind of overcome a lot of that social risk and that social, I wouldn't say being ostracized, but there is a point where that's why a lot of entrepreneurs gravitate to each other. I said earlier, and it wasn't at all, and hopefully a name drop. It was just more of like some of these prominent Taiwanese Americans are well-known entrepreneurs of companies that anybody, if I said on this podcast, would know. And we all know each other. A lot of us know each other. And the reason is because Steve Chen, this is a true story. Steve Chen from YouTube was one of the first people to actually kind of take us under his wing. And he had always just said, I wanted to help Taiwanese entrepreneurs. So him and his wife, Jamie, are amazing. They're like big brothers. Same with Kevin from Twitch. I've had a lot of conversations when I didn't know how to be a CEO. And, I didn't see a lot of people built like us and look like us. And I felt like Kevin, who ran Twitch, was somebody I really looked up to. And I bounced off of ideas, whether it was like potential lawsuits or people who were big loyalists and they're no longer loyal fans, or controversies. Like Kevin was really, really instrumental in that. And I think that was the community that was there. And then I hope they can allow me to say this, is that they at one point had felt alone, at risk, and ostracized.
Yeah. And that's probably why they wanted to give back. Yeah.
So that's, I think, the main thing about entrepreneurship, for us at least.
Yes.
I'll add one extra thought it's almost like a soundbite. We have no idea what we're doing. That is
in
something
general?
people, I would say yes, because no one's done what we've done.
Yeah. You make it up as you go along, right?
Yeah. Like, we're not a coffee shop. So when we get evaluated, we don't get coffee shop valuations. When I literally was talking to a landlord, one of our top landlords. We were up for a renewal, and, I love them, but they kind of still talk to us as if we're like this novelty, not like a staple, not like we belong. And so we get a lot of those kind of that language, that tone that you can see. And so where does Boba Guys go from here? Like, for example, we've been around for 11 years. Right now in America, in the large cities, we don't really have to prove that boba belongs.
Right.
I think have done a pretty good part in kind of leading the mainstream discussion about boba and being in all the places that you would see. We've done a lot of stuff in, in mainstream like Hollywood or in plazas in New York City and in LA, San Francisco. So to us, like, to be honest, where do we go from here? I think that is a huge part of just entrepreneurship. I think a lot of it, I'll say, I was talking to my friends in Taiwan this trip, and it's kind of the crisis I think sometimes that Taiwan is in between. It's like this in-between stage. I'm not going to talk about politics here, but like independence, or how independent are you, or how much are you part of the mothership? That's essentially the conversation we're having, because the Starbuckses, the Peet's Coffees, the Jamba Juices, the private equity groups are all looking at us right now because we're at the right size for them. And obviously, without getting, again, political, like, you can kind of understand, like, Taiwan's in the same situation. How much do you kind of like fold in? And just last year, I guess, Starbucks and a lot of these Peet's Coffee, they started doing boba for the first time and jelly for the first time. So they're kind of encroaching into our world. So Bin and I have been.
So are you guys going to do coffee?
We've been doing coffee, but I think the question, is like, how much do we kind of merge into their worlds?
I was just curious. So then, do you guys have an ambition to be like the size of a Jamba Juice or a Starbucks or whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that these past 2 years have been just like, I think the whole playbook, if you even had one, was like really thrown out the window. So just to give you some context, in 2020, in February, I was in Japan, and not a lot of people know, the public doesn't really know, but we'd been working for over a year to build Boba Guys Japan. We had contracts in place with a group that helped bring Starbucks there, and we were already had our site worked out and we were ready to launch. And I was in Japan when the Princess cruise ship, for those that remember that, all those Americans and everyone were stuck on that cruise ship. And there was this thing going around, and no one really knew what Corona was. And so I'm already texting Andrew, hey, this Japan thing might get delayed a little bit. I actually thought it was only going to be a few months. I was like, maybe a month. We'll push it back 1 month. And he's like, they're sending me to Washington, D.C. to talk about this. Because Andrew does advising for the Small Business Council. And I think that was, Andrew, I don't know if you want to talk about that experience, but I think that was kind of a shock for most Americans, because we were one of the earliest ones to kind of sound the alarm and say, like, hey, we're in Asia right now, and we're in DC right now. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what our families are saying. This is what our friends overseas are saying. This is going to be a big thing. And a lot of Americans, even our own friends, were like, you're making a big deal out of nothing. But I think that we already known the writing was on the wall. And, we were one of the earliest to shut down all of our stores. We actually laid everyone off to go get unemployment because we knew this was going to be very protracted. But I don't know, Andrew, I don't know if you want to talk about that DC experience. That was kind of crazy.
Yeah. I think it ties back to even, again, the topic of this podcast is that when people say that Asian Americans are like the invisible minority, I probably had not felt fully until the pandemic. And it started with, as Bin, we were kind of talking about it because Bin literally was in Japan. I was FaceTiming him. Who'd you bring with you? Was it Alex or Gordon? You were on the streets of Tokyo, and you're like, hey, it's really empty out here, Andrew. Like, everyone's gone in Tokyo. And I was like, oh, shoot. And then, as Bin said, I had been called in, and I wasn't really allowed to tell anybody, but to testify in Congress, because we were getting ready to kind of try to tell the narrative that small businesses in America need help, which obviously was true. But this is, I got told, I think in February 28th, it was a leap year. So I remember it was like leap day that I was getting ready to go to DC. I testified on March 10th, which that was a week and a half before all the shutdowns. The shutdowns were between March 18th and March 20th. So I was in DC, I was like telling people small businesses need help. And then some people don't even think we're small businesses. So I already felt like, Boba Guys doesn't need help though. Why are they even testifying on behalf of small businesses? We're independent, and we're not actually not that, And so if anything, we felt invisible. On one hand, we were like trying to tell people that this virus is real. We have friends in China, and, they were telling us on WeChat, like, my uncle lives in Shanghai, like how real it was, and talking about body bags, sadly. And he was like, it's real. And then so in America, we have this thing where, oh, only if it comes from the people who look and sound the right way, then you'll believe us, right? Like that's what I love America. But it was frustrating. I remember getting all these Twitter, and to this day, people were very polarized on Twitter, right? People always like, oh, Andrew and Bin said this, or watch them go out of business and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, look at all the hard calls we make, whether or not we brought local manufacturing. Taiwan did not like that. We brought bamboo straws and did the plastic straw ban. A lot of conservatives didn't like that. All the calls we make, we generally make early. And if you look in hindsight, you'll see that we actually almost always had made the right call. And the reason why, I think, comes from the training that we grew up, I think, our Taiwanese upbringing, which is you're always in between two different sides. And so you have to almost put yourself as if, am I a conservative or am I progressive?
You have to think ahead for yourself.
Always, because we're almost like a survival mentality. Almost like, I don't want to get too personal, but my therapist said that I have some version of like a survivor syndrome, which is growing up, I was the eldest child, Bin too, and we come from immigrant families. I grew up pretty...
Me too.
Yeah, I know, right? And so many of these...
Go firstborn.
Exactly. Firstborn, immigrant kids. You have to learn how to get in college yourself. You have to kind of fend for yourself, financial aid yourself. First job is yourself. And I love my parents, but they weren't helping me in that because they just didn't have the skill set. So much of what we went through was, I was just trying to survive. And the good news is, when you're a survivor, you're always basically very aware of your surroundings, always hyper aware. So we were aware of what was going on in Europe, in Asia. So QR codes and contact tracing and taking thermometers. Bin and I we had like 50 thermometers in the company because Bin and I bought almost all the temperature thermometers from Amazon. And we had these test kits that were technically in America not really, and I'll say it now, at the time wasn't fully legal by the FDA, which it became legal. But we had these antigen tests that we got from Asia because we had all these Asia connections. And people were like, how are you running your own testing? And it was because Asia was already 6 months ahead of everybody. And so we were able to kind of replicate what we saw and I heard from our friends in Korea and in Asia out here in Taiwan. So put that all together, like I think so much of that mentality and why I think we even survived the pandemic was because we had a lot of that. I felt like that grit that came from kind of our cultural upbringing. And it was weird. And I'll say this and I'll end with a funny thought is that, when we all celebrated New Year's, it was like a reunion because a lot of us hadn't seen each other. And you know what it felt like? We were saying it was like adult love boat.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
The first time when you're young, you sat there because you're trying to learn.
Did you go?
I never did. Ben didn't go, right? The bingo.
No, I was so mad that I didn't learn about it until like way after college. My parents never told me about it. I think that, it's a very privileged opportunity for some people. Maybe I just didn't qualify. But, we actually know Abigail King Win that wrote Love Boat Taipei.
Yes, she's been on the podcast too.
She's amazing. And we kind of joked about it too. And I was like, I did not get the memo. I'm so jealous. I would have really killed it. But I had a very similar Love Boat experience, sort of. One of my trips, sometimes I would go in the summers. And one of my trips when I was maybe in like junior high or high school, I went with a bunch of friends and everyone has scooters in Taiwan, of course. And all the guys put their keys in the scooter helmet and then the girls grab a key out and that's who you go on a date with for the day. So that was like my mini version of Love Boat, but I really missed out on the fireworks.
So yeah, sorry, Andrew, were you going somewhere with that thought?
The final thought of that is that when we all, quote unquote, these Taiwanese Americans or just Asian Americans, a lot of them survived the pandemic in America, when we were watching all our friends kind of party in Taipei during that, gold visa period, or when Thailand opened and Thailand was really robust. And in Europe, everybody went to Europe. But our home, like Taiwan, a lot of us couldn't go back yet because we didn't want to go through the quarantine. And so when all of us came back, it was like us sharing all the memories of who we were. And we're like, oh my God, I hadn't seen, my friend Jameson. I hadn't seen my friend Peter like all this time. And I was like, hey, I can't believe we survived. And then they were just like, what happened in America? You guys are like polarized. Your elections just happened. At the time, I think one of the parties couldn't even elect their own speaker, so we're just watching the news and we're like, well, what's happening in America? And so to me, it felt like an adult love boat because it was kind of like another cultural exchange where, I'm sure people are asking right now because of what's happening in other parts of the world, like Ukraine. People are like, Andrew and Bin, would you want to say something? You guys are roughly one of the more prominent Taiwanese Americans, and I do politics. So I happen to fit the right profile of getting asked questions about that type of relation. And I'm tied to economics. So like, how do we get Taiwan to have more, economic power that's just not TCMC? Like, how can we actually create more robust industry there? So to me, that was kind of the adult, love boat experience, because now we're all grown up. So we're like, what do we want to do? What startups do you want? What kind of industries are we going to grow here?
That's amazing. Really great to be around all this energy and all these movers and shakers and people that really care about Taiwan. I wish I could be a fly on the wall in that conversation. But speaking of the pandemic, I know that you guys also have a book out, and it looks like your book came out around that time. So were you guys working on your boba book during the pandemic? And what was that like?
Yeah, I actually have it. I have it right here because I thought that might come up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great. This was just like Boba Guys, really a passion project. We pulled out all the stops on it, and sadly, it did launch during a pandemic. It happened to actually really sell really well, maybe because it's one of the first of its kind in the United States. I think that there's probably some great texts, but they're not maybe in English. And so, yeah, the book was amazing. Part of it is because, we just did an incredible Asia trip to really do a lot of deep research. Yeah, we took our co-author, we took our photographer.
How did you meet your co-author?
Maybe Andrew can talk about how we chose Richard Parks, our co-author. But the one note I did want to say is that the book isn't called the Boba Guys book. It's called the Boba book because we really wrote it for the entire industry. I think that there's going to be a whole generation of future Boba Guys companies that are similar to us, that maybe have similar shared values well after we're gone. And so I hope this book endures. And I think that there's a lot of recipes there, but there's also just really good culture. And I think that that's what we wanted to put out in the world. And so that's why our name's not front row and center on it. It's really for everyone to use. That's not our secret sauce at Boba Guys. It's the people that work there. It's what we built. Andrew, how do you want to talk about Richard Parks? Because that was an interesting recruitment.
Yeah.
Because we interviewed a lot of people.
Supposedly controversial. Our co-author, Richard, if he's listening, he's one of our favorite people. He spent some time, and we had talked about, what kind of person, if it wasn't Ben and I writing, which we wrote a lot of it, but, Richard, he enveloped it a lot, the most. That's his job. And, if we pick somebody Asian, we were like, well, that's just going to give us the same perspective. And so we were trying to find the right writer that actually could fit that, and Richard I think he got nominated for a James Beard for Dumplings. But he's a white guy. So,
yeah.
A lot of people are like, oh, Boba Guys picked a white guy. I think, let's just say, if you ever hear us talk, we're a lot more complicated. I just don't do identity politics. It's why I don't pander. Ben and I are just not people who pander. So, I think it's kind of almost racist to say, oh, you picked him because of race. We didn't. We picked him because he actually nominated for a James Beard Award on a dumpling thing for Lucky Peach. And then he had written about food, and he's from Los Angeles. Which is a very diverse food background. And there's not many food writers like that in America. So we felt like he fit the right lens. When he came, he loved it. By the end of the trip, to this day, every time he's like at something that's like Chinese or Asian or Japanese or Korean, he always pings us, and he's always like, oh, I saw this. This reminded me of Japan. This reminded me of Taiwan. And that is kind of what I hope. The reason I tell you all that is our job is to bridge cultures. That's the mission of Boba Guys. And for 11 years, I would say our job was to make people who felt like they didn't belong. Ironically, yes, Asian people sometimes feel like we don't belong. But in other ways, people do not feel like they belong in our world. And if we could maybe make them feel welcome in our world, they might want to reciprocate and make us feel more included. And that's kind of what we do, because we can't control them, but we can control what we do. And so we make people feel so welcome around Boba culture or Taiwanese or Asian culture that's why people say that. But I know the internet thinks, oh, half of them, they're like, oh, they just, they're pander to white people or whatever. And I'm like, that's just really lazy thinking. We have Midwestern moms who email us or write DMs to us or leave Amazon reviews about the book because they're making boba for the first time in Kansas City, in Arkansas, where they don't have many boba shops. And all they have is like maybe a Quickly, or they say, oh, I go to this Vietnamese restaurant or this Thai restaurant and I get Thai tea. What are more things like Thai tea can I make at home for my kids?
Yeah.
Where do I buy these ingredients? If you're getting a Midwestern mom who's like 45 years old with a teenager and you're getting her to do that, I mean, we don't pander to the haters, but I'm going to tell you, that's our job. You know, I think anybody who thinks that is not our job, I think they're kind of naive and backwards. I think so much of what we do in Taiwan, we always remember is like the culture of Taiwan was colonized by the Dutch first, right? Then the Japanese came and then the Chinese came. So my friend Peter was just telling me, he's like, you know, the Taiwanese, they speak Chinese, they are culturally Japanese, and they want to be American.
And now for a short break. Talking Taiwan is the longest running Taiwan-related podcast and a Golden Crane Award winner. And our two-person team is committed to continuing to producing meaningful content for you. As an independently produced podcast, we want to take a moment to thank all of our listeners and donors for your support. You make our work possible. Talking Taiwan has been around for 10 years already, and with your support, we'll be around for 10 more. We have a lot of exciting things in the works that we will be announcing soon. To support our work, you can make a contribution to our GoFundMe campaign or at talkingtaiwan.com/support. Contributions can be made to Talking Taiwan Podcast at gmail.com via PayPal or Zelle. Now, back to our episode.
And I was like, oh, that's pretty accurate. And the want to be American, I said, why do you think that though? Why don't think they want to be Taiwanese? It's like, well, because American is kind of this melting pot. And I think people like the international flavor of America. And I think, you know, that's why some of these high schools that people will go to, like TAS, you know, that's why they kind of pump out all these amazing students and they come to the US to study because they're kind of built in this global mindset. So when you think about Taiwan, like, that's why we kind of do what we do. What we do at Boba Guys is very Taiwanese. We take the best of what's from, you know, Asian culture and we kind of Westernize it. Yet nobody says anything about Taiwan, but they always say that about not just us. They say that about Eddie Huang from Bouthouse. They say that about, you know, Vivian from Pine and Crane. You know, they're like, oh, that's not traditional. That's like for hipsters in Silver Lake. And I think that's just very lazy thinking. So I would encourage people, you know, the Taiwanese community, like it's a small community. We got to get each other's back and we got to actually lead other ethnic communities. You know, I'm also part Chinese too. My dad is from Guangzhou. Mm-hmm. So how do we lead communities where we have very strong sense of culture and identity? But how do we do it by making people feel included and making them want to emulate us versus us chasing other cultures all the time?
Right. Yeah, and Taiwan being an island nation has so many different influences. There's a lot of people from Southeast Asia and other parts. There's a lot of influences from other cultures.
Yeah, that's why the food scene's so great.
Yeah. And what is life like now? Because you guys have, like 24 stores. So going from when you started the pop-up, what's life like now?
Ben, we have different lives because Ben's a new dad.
Yeah.
I mean, contrary to popular belief, we do have a life outside of Boba Guys. But, you know, we've been doing this thing 11 years now. And I think it's incredible in the sense that a lot of small businesses don't really go past the first 2 to 5 years. I think it's very, very hard. It's extremely hard to get to our size without taking like large VC investment. And I think that life for us, I think right now is really, you know, these are strange times. I think that all the pundits are saying that we're heading into a recession. And I think that there is, as business owners that are responsible for a lot of people's jobs, you know, our job is to make sure that we survive and we thrive and we do the things that are within our control. Sometimes those are making hard calls. You know, I think that if you've seen in the tech world, they're laying people off by the size of small cities. That's huge. And it has secondary effects, even in the areas where we have a lot of these cafes. If you go to San Francisco, the city is emptied out. Like, I hate to say it, it's really emptied out. You know, thankfully we've spread it around some risk and we've got stores that are doing really well in the suburbs where people have migrated to and relocated to. But I think that the city is also really resilient and our company is also super resilient. The fact that we started off scrappy, we didn't take a whole bunch of VC money in the early days, helped us kind of now in situations like this where we're like, oh, belt tightening, we've always done that. So I feel like we're not a stranger to that part. Whereas some companies have a really hard time cutting a lot of fat because they're used to having, everything or cash reserves. And so I think that, it's going to be a really, really rough time for not just us, but anyone in business. And I think that even tech has always been on a rocket ship. Even tech is seeing some
Yeah.
really, really tough times and headwinds ahead. And so, what can we do around that? I think for us, there's obviously our team. We have to take care of our team. We have to make sure that we're growing sustainably. We were able to kind of grow during the pandemic. But part of that was just because a lot of landlords needed people to take their leases. And I think that was fortunate for us because it's like there was just so much landlords that just wanted people to take their leases. But now we're in this place where we're like, okay, well, we have 20, 22, 24 stores. How do we make sure that we're still surviving? How do we make sure that we're taking care of our team?
And going back to, like you said, some businesses not surviving beyond 3 to 5 years, was there a point in time when you thought that the business wasn't going to survive or be successful? And what was that like? And how did you guys pull through?
Yeah, I think that there's probably two good pivotal parts. The first one was after we did the pop-up. The pop-up was just for fun. You don't do a pop-up to try to make a bunch of money. Again, we kept our day jobs. We weren't trying to quit our jobs to do Boba. We love Boba. We were like, do we love Boba that much? And I think that we left some really lucrative jobs to finally do Boba Guys. But I think that even after the pop-up, I think that we weren't even really sure if we wanted to continue doing this. Because again, I think that if we had stayed on our corporate track, we'd probably be at the very least VPs. I don't know, Andrew might have been a CEO in a larger company or running Asia somewhere for Pepsi. Like, I think that we were, not to toot our own horn, but we were pretty successful in the corporate world. And I think that, we were definitely climbing that track. And so there was a lot of opportunity costs just by doing this and really pursuing it. And so even in the pop-up days, I had second thoughts about like, do I even want to, I actually had a Salesforce offer, a very lucrative one.
Okay.
And I was like, Andrew, I need to think about this over the winter before we can actually do this. I don't know if Boba is our thing. And I think during that time when we shut down the pop-up, we got so many emails from fans saying like, where did you guys go? We follow you on IG, we follow you on Facebook. Where did you go? Like, this was our place. This was like our cheers, like we always look forward to going to your pop-ups. Like, we missed it. Where did you guys go? And I think that that's what really kind of pulled us back. And then in 2020, the other time I think I touched on a little bit was like when the pandemic happened and I told Andrew like, hey, look, there's this thing called Corona. And he went to DC to testify on it. When we shut down all of our stores, I think that there was a moment where we're like, just like many other businesses, like we weren't really sure. It wasn't like tech where you can work from home. You can't work from home and serve people boba. And so I think that there was a moment there when we had to, lay everyone off. And it was so sad because, and I cried. I think having to fire someone and so that they could get unemployment over Zoom, that was the most painful thing because these people gave years of their life to kind of help us build it to where we were. And so I think in 2020, in the early days when we shut down all of our stores and had to go from 400 employees to 4, that was super dark and that was super tough.
Wow. Yeah, that's brutal. Andrew, did you want to add something?
Those are the two moments. I mean, I don't think we're still out of it. We don't know what's happening in this recession, but I think right now, the real question, as I mentioned earlier, is more of the existential question of like, I think our job of making boba known with, some of our peers, I think we've done that over the last decade. The first wave of boba, Tapioca Express and Quickly, that made college campuses and Asians drink boba. We kind of came in the last decade. Most people will say probably started with us and some of our friends. Like I think give credit to Seven Leaves. We know the Win family from Seven Leaves really well. Who else? Kung Fu Tea's done really well from New York. Those guys are great. That's probably the second kind of wave. Although our style kind of took over, which is like everything made in house, local milk, Americanized kind of ingredients or Westernized kind of like flavor profiles. That to me, I think is the second wave that we kind of started and we're in. But even that's not going to have a long time to go. So right now what is this third thing? I don't know. Ben and I have been talking because we were seeing all these articles. I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but I do think it's probably this combination of, I think the best cafes in the world are from Taipei and Seoul. On Yulgongjie, all the side streets, a lot of these cafes are just so cute. They have so much character. They make these like really cute drinks. They all different. Korea did the same thing. I think the third wave of boba is probably the final wave. where boba is going to intersect with probably larger coffee chains. And the boba drinks in the world are going to look like coffee drinks. And in America, the coffee drinks are going to look like boba drinks.
Interesting. Actually, I wanted to go back and I did skim your book about the word boba. I thought there was a funny story in your book about when you told your mom that you're starting this company called Boba Guys.
Oh, that was my mom. Yeah. Well, actually, it involves Bin too. So the short version is people may or may not know that most of the time when you say boba, in Mandarin, I speak Mandarin Cantonese, so I'm going to flip. I know hopefully some people speak a little bit Canto on your podcast or your listeners, is that it's usually 珍珠奶茶, which is like pearl milk tea. But in Hong Kong, they would also call it like boba nai cha or boba nai cha. Sorry, my accent. Mm-hmm. So, but in Hong Kong, there was a famous actress. Her name was Amy Yip. And my mom knew Amy Yip. Any parent of that generation, the boomer generation, knows Amy Yip. I apparently didn't because I just never thought of it. She was known for having a large chest. And they would call anything that were big balls or big spheres boba.
Okay.
And so when I told my mom, hey, and so it was slang for breasts. Boba was slang for breasts. So I told my mom, I said, hey mom, I think my friend and I are going to do this cafe thing. And my mom originally didn't even want me to do it because I came out of the restaurant business because my parents had restaurants in New Jersey. So originally it was that, but then the conversation goes, okay, what's the name? And I was like, oh, it's, Boba Guys. And then she's like, Boba Guys. And I was like, yeah. And then he goes, you know what that means, right? And so my mom says, it means boobs or breast guys. Andrew, that's so bad. You should be ashamed or whatever. So I was like, oh, I don't even know that. So my generation doesn't know. Why does it matter? She's like, well, whatever. So I looked on my internet and apparently there's a couple articles at the time that say it's true. I go to Bin and I go, Bin, I talked to my mom and my mom said that boba means breast. Did you know this? And he goes, oh yeah, I heard that before. And so I was like, well, you didn't warn me. It didn't come up in any of the conversations. Like, well, I just didn't think it was our generation's thing. And it wasn't enough to like, the name was good. So I just thought it was really funny. And I'm glad because before we started, it was probably in America, if you're in New York, you would still call it bubble tea, right? You'd call it bubble tea in Canada and you're in New York. But if you're West Coast, you call it boba. I would like to say because of us and, some others in our industry right now, if you in America, you're pretty much calling it boba now. You're not using the term bubble tea. And I'd like to say we had a little bit, it's a friendly banter, but me and my East Coast and Canadian friends always banter about it. Cause I'm like, you said bubble tea. That's not what it's called, So now we're like, hopefully swung full boba. Yeah. I think, what we're trying to do is, I was alluding to it, but this is kind of related, but unrelated. There's all these slang too that, cause my dad he's Cantonese and one of our signature drinks is a Hong Kong Nai Tai, which is like a Hong Kong milk tea, which is very dark brewed, very kind of like strong black tea, sometimes coffee. And then you use evaporated or condensed milk with it and sugar. And so when you kind of get into kind of like deep cultural things is like when we name drinks now, we either have to go with the most authentic name or we have to kind of like dodge some of these names. Cause another thing is, I don't know if you know, but boba means silly or stupid in Portuguese. So we didn't know that. So we were told that too. So I was like, oh man. So there's all these things that we now, because when we name something now, it's kind of across 24 stores. So I'll give you another last one is a good cultural example. Actually, Ben and I rarely agree to podcasts, so we haven't done podcasts in forever. So we just love a chance to.
No,
tell
I
our
love
story.
it. Thank you so much. I love these stories. It's all good.
Ben, I'm gonna tell her about Taiwan and our menu where we have an oolong. And there's this debate on whether or not we call it an iron goddess or a Taiwan. And there's this debate when Ben is our designer and he does a lot of our marketing. At the time, our marketing team, when neither were Asian, right? Yeah, Anna was not. So they didn't have any language background for Chinese. So we had to explain to them what it meant. And so there was this debate on whether or not we call it the ethnic name, versus the popular name that if you go to a Tivana or whatever, they'll call it iron goddess. So if you go to our Boba Guys, any of our stores, it'll say Te Guanyin Oolong. And just getting Americans in New York City, in Los Angeles, in Silicon Valley to say, Tai Guan Yin, like just trying that's why we do it. And so it allows us to tell these stories of like slang or, well, then they're going to be like, well, what is Iron Goddess? Why is it even named that? Well, we talk about how there's different kind of like gods or goddesses in kind of Chinese culture and the lore. And half of our employees are Asian, but most of them are actually not Chinese. So the other half are non-Asian. So we have to do a lot of this kind of cultural explanation. So we love kind of doing that. So yeah, that's kind of maybe my final thoughts, if there are any, about what we do. Is so much of what we do is layered kind of culture. So it might look like a fancy westernized cafe or facade on the outside, but if you hear us talk for even 45 minutes, we Trojan horse culture, and specifically a lot of Asian, Chinese, Taiwanese culture.
That's a great way to put it.
They're like, oh my God, I didn't know that this is why you guys chose slanted jellies. Slanted jelly was a Chinese culture thing, or Asian culture, a comment.
Yeah. I thought it was also kind of funny, another story about your book, I think in the very beginning, about how you're trying to figure out who invented bubble tea, because it's a huge debate. Most people do agree that it's from Taiwan, but which tea shop or where did it come from? It was a little bit anticlimactic, right? What you guys discovered.
Ben can tell you that one because he was on hunt for that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of people wanted us to like, I hear when you shoot a documentary, you know how it starts, but you don't really know how it ends. And that's kind of how it was for us too. We were going to go to Asia and we are going to get to the bottom of this because everyone wanted to know. We had heard CST Tang was the one, but then, there was other places and everyone kind of had a take. And I think that it's the same with Boba Guys, and so we came all this way to kind of have to get this interview and talk to Tang, the supposed innovator of boba milk tea. And I don't know if this is like Taiwanese. Maybe it's just a very Taiwanese thing, but they didn't care if they were the inventor of boba milk tea. They had their story of their first cup and all that. And we tried to reach out to Hanglan Tea Room as well. And we really tried to say, like, here are the facts. But they didn't really care about proving if they were the first, because I think that they really stood by their product and they knew they were doing it the best. And I think that it's the same with kind of in the food world. There's a lot of what they call gatekeeping. And, they say like, oh, this place did it first, then only to find out like, I have to say Americans do this a lot. They try to Columbus something, or they say like, here's how this was done, never minding that the Indians probably did it way before you thought about it, and I think that there's just so many countless examples of that. And so when we got there and we learned, and it was very anticlimactic, they weren't like so much like, hey, look, we said we're the first, but we're also, we're also still here. And I think most people think we are. Does that rule out that there was maybe someone that did it even earlier? No, and I think this is stuff of lore. I think that that's what makes boba so amazing and folksy, and like kind of like how it's like one of those great exports from Taiwan. That's just like the fact that we can even start a boba shop in America and have it grow the way we did. I think that that is a huge success for Taiwan, because I think that's what Taiwan does really, really well. I have to say, if you go at the food stalls, each one of those food stalls, they may only do one thing, but they do that thing really, really well. And so you're like, where do I do the beef noodles? Well, there's always that one stall. And I think that that's where there's so much lore going on. There's so much stuff that's always passed down colloquially. And I think that's what we found out for the book. And so it was a kind of a bummer to not say definitively that they didn't care that much, but that's the truth.
That's also very Taiwanese, right? In Taiwan, everything is like, 差不多, it's almost,
yeah, close enough. Yeah.
So I think, so it was a very Taiwanese answer too. Yeah.
Was there some kind of lawsuit too, though, in the beginning of like who's claiming to be the inventor or the first or something?
I think there was. We had done research that there was a lawsuit between the two companies. Yeah. And so we also don't want to get in the middle of that.
So maybe that's why they're just like, never mind, doesn't matter who's going to claim. Kind of complicated. I also took a look at your online shop, and you have a lot of really fun items like that plush aardvark. And I noticed that mask that allows you to drink through the straw without removing it. And really, really fun items. Like, what are some of your most popular items? And tell me the story behind the aardvark.
Ben, you could talk about the logo aardvark. Yeah, I think that'd be a great story.
Yeah, I mean, the aardvark, I think that we knew we wanted to be called Boba Guys because we're two guys, and it was really just us two in the beginning. There wasn't even any employees. The first employee was, Andrew's sister. So we had the name very early on, but we weren't quite sure what's our logo? It's not going to just be like the words, is it? A designer by trade. And I think that the aardvark ended up being the perfect mascot for us, many, many reasons. And I think that it's always funny to see kids kind of try to guess what kind of animal it is. Some people say anteater or armadillo. It has a built-in straw. It's friendly but approachable. You're not quite sure what country it's from. Very similar to boba as well. There wasn't any trademarks for aardvarks, and I think that that's where it really helped us. Although we have seen a bootleg Boba Guys in Vietnam that is unauthorized. That's not us. And I think that, so the aardvark was something that where we landed on. We knew we didn't want it to be like our faces, like as cartoons. And at the time in 2011, everything was very, very cutesy and like bubbly. And we wanted to make it similar to our product, which was, something that appealed to people that were no longer kids, but still enjoyed boba or could enjoy boba. And so we wanted something to make something mature, but still a little bit fun. And when we first created the logo, we blew it up at our pop-up as this huge, huge printout. I don't know. It's maybe because we couldn't afford any other advertising or marketing. And so we just printed it out really, really huge. And we realized that people really loved the animal and loved taking their photos with it and their drinks. And, you said as Ho Chi, he was one of the very first, came to our first pop-up. And that kind of really caught everyone's attention. And they call them, super graphics. That's the trend now, is to have your logo massive in your stores, but it wasn't back then.
Yeah. And related to merchandise, to answer that part of the question, a lot of the merchandise, the plush aardvark, which is what you were saying, or I don't know if you saw, we had old merchandise like Care Bears. We did a huge collaboration with Care Bears. We have lunch boxes.
Yes.
So a lot of the times we choose merch to make, we make them overseas. So we make them in Asia most of the time. And so it takes a lot of time to customize. So that aardvark is customized for Boba Guys, right? You can see it's made just like our logo and it's drinking a boba just like ours. And the real reason why we did it was, again, of what we were trying to say is we Trojan horse culture. Like there's a kid right now in middle America because they love boba so much and because they visited their family in Los Angeles or San Francisco and they went back to where they're from and they want to drink boba and they only have other types of boba shops. They don't have our style, And so the kids 5 years old, 6 years old, probably sleeping with a plush right now. They're carrying a lunchbox with them. And I don't know all the kids' IP right now, but instead of some Disney character or some Marvel character, it's a Boba Guys and Care Bears. It's a Boba Guys lunchbox. So those small little things, I hope 10, 20, 30 years from now, we are so ingrained in the culture that I don't want us to kind of quote unquote, as I said a couple times now, we don't pander. You don't want to choose something just because they're Asian, just because we need that to fill the diversity quota. You chose it because it was normal. You chose it because it felt familiar and you're connected with it somehow. So a kid growing up with these merchandise, with Boba Guys, instead of we're in these malls, right? And instead of going to a Blue Bottle, you can now go to a Boba Guys. Instead of going to a Phil's Coffee, you go to a Boba Guys. Instead of a Jamba Juice, you're going to a Boba Guys. And we see groups of friends say, hey, I'll meet you back here. Let's all go get our drinks. And they come back. I've seen it with my own eyes in almost all our complexes that we're in. And that right there tells you the difference of where we started 10, 11 years ago to where we are now. Because 10, 11 years ago, you would only gather together, get in a car, go to San Gabriel Valley and go to half and half. And you'd wait half an hour for half and half because I love their iced milk, right? Right now, you can go to any mall and kind of do the same thing across all different categories. And so that to me is where I think whether it's the drink products or what we do in merchandise and storytelling, what we try to do. So even allowing us to answer that way, like, and hope people listen, it's like, oh, and now I get Andrew and Bin. I get what they're trying to do. They're not doing this kind of like whitewash style of boba. They're like really deep. Call it soft power, right? It's the idea that, the power is not always coercive. And how does a little island like Taiwan with 25, the population of California, how does it have so much cultural impact on the world? And, the semiconductor industry, the, bamboo straws we get from Taiwan. It's also the leader in, progressive politics like LGBTQ and pride. The biggest pride celebration in Asia is in Taiwan. It's in Taipei. And I think people think, oh, but I thought Asians are conservative. And that's kind of where we're trying to tell people, like, that's a very American, westernized, simplistic thought. And so I feel like if there's a good beachhead to let people access Asian culture, I think it is also Taiwan. So And maybe then we would do better in Asia. Because right now, if you're American, you show an American passport in most of these countries, people don't look at us the same. It's sometimes almost embarrassing being American. I hope that we find pride in our culture and that we can be that bridge.
And I also saw that you have a boba home kit. What's in the boba home kit?
Yeah, that came out of the pandemic. I think that when we were shut down, everyone was working at home, staying at home. Obviously, our stores were closed. And I think that the kit was really bringing the boba shop to them. And I think that similar to the book, we were reaching people that we may never reach, like there were people in Oklahoma, there were people in Idaho making boba for the first time. I mean, we taught thousands of people over Zoom how to make boba. Andrew and I would do these classes. The corporate companies would book us to teach like 200 people at a time how to make boba. And I think that that's where, similar to the boba factory, not everyone agreed with it. Some people, I don't know if it's gatekeeping or what, but boba is for everyone. And I think that that's where we really stand by that. And I think that the kits drove home that aspect. We were able to have kids at home make boba and learn it for the first time. And so it was amazing. We started with a matcha kit. We own our own tea company, so we have our own Tea People matcha. We have our own boba from our own boba factory where we made into a smaller package to package in there. We were sometimes shipping milk and boba straw and obviously the matcha whisk. And I think that for us, it was a really accessible way to reach people. In this past winter, we had a huge hit with Williams-Sonoma. We had an exclusive kit for them, the strawberry matcha latte boba kit. And I think that that's where I think it really broke open the doors of like truly reaching, because in the beginning, it was just like our audience, people that knew who we were could order our kits. But once you're on Williams-Sonoma, like that's like every mom across the US. And I think that was pretty amazing. And there's going to be people that we'll never meet. And I think that they'll be making boba. I think that that's just super wonderful. And it's part of our mission.
Yeah. So are you guys still doing the online classes?
Yeah, we just taught one, a public class where, during the holidays, if you order a kit, we'll teach you how to make boba. Generally, it's reserved for corporations book us. And during the pandemic, we had all the time in the world. No one was going anywhere. Now that all of our stores are running and we're traveling, we're doing all these things, kind of harder to pin down. But yeah, we still love teaching it, and that's the real joy of it, is like getting people to have confidence in making these drinks. And it's not just coffee. It's not just smoothies anymore. It's boba it's like you can make it at home. Like for a long time, people weren't making coffee at home. You would just go to a cafe. It would be unheard of to make it at home. And now we're starting to see it with boba, which we think is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, like Trader Joe's has a home kit that you can microwave or boil the bobas at home. So is there anything else that you guys would like to share or talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
I felt like we covered a lot. Thanks for even letting us share so much.
Yeah, thanks for giving us this platform. We've been around 11 years, so we know we're not the young kid on the block anymore. We're kind of entering this kind of vanguard, kind of pioneer kind of stage where we do mentor a lot of companies. There's a lot of up and coming, when we started in 2011, there wasn't a whole lot of Asian American entrepreneurs doing food. And if they were doing restaurants, but they weren't really doing CPG or they weren't doing these cafes. And now there's so many of them. They're so amazing. There's like Sanzo and there's just so many companies out there, Fly by Jing, our friends, and they're all doing incredible things. And so I would say, like, as Andrew said at the beginning of the podcast, like there's more of us now. And I think that that's really, really great. And I think that these podcasts also connect us with people that we might not meet otherwise. And a lot of people have reached out because of that. So thank you for giving us this platform and letting us share our story. And podcasts are actually our favorite way to kind of do media these days. I think that there's like right now, if you look in journalism, it's always people are always chasing like this soundbite, but podcasts really give it the real time to kind of unravel and give the full story and context, which is always sometimes missing.
So how can people learn more about you? Where's the best place for them to connect with you or find you guys?
Well, you can follow us on all social media, Boba Guys, BOBA-Guys.com, or all the Twitter and Instagram, TikTok is all Boba Guys. Most of our Taiwanese specific stuff, though, I think I put on my personal Instagram. So a lot of that is Bin's personal Instagram is YMFY. He does a lot of kind of like art stuff. Bin has much better taste than I do. And then I'm Chaumeleon with my last name, Chau, CHAUMELEN. I was talking a lot about my Taiwan trips there. I talk a lot about Asian leadership style because I don't think people are following Boba Guys for that. We have obviously seen some of your prior guests on the show. Always flattering to kind of be a part of something that's been around for so long. What I would hope, as part of, Taiwanese American or Taiwanese Western media is that all the stuff that we said, whatever we can do to amplify and help, like we have a very similar kind of goal, which is how do we use these stories and tell people all the stuff that we said here. They're not going to listen to full hours interview unless they really kind of understand. But even the snippets of making people feel welcome, using Boba as kind of like this conduit for conversation, because I'm sure people are going to start asking. We get asked all the time about the U.S.-China relations, and people know culturally I'm mostly Taiwanese because my mom's from Da'an, Taipei. Mm-hmm. And I'm super westernized. So that's kind of where that comes in. I don't want to get, again, political, but Bin and I together, Bin's full Taiwanese. His actually families from like generations, like from Aborigine tribes. So I think when Bin and I started this company, and I'm obviously a little bit more outspoken, but Bin and I align on the same values of, hey, what we're trying to do is not hit people over the head with our culture, but to have people and draw them in and feel like, oh, I can relate to that. I'm an immigrant. The way Andrew and Bin talk about Taiwanese culture is actually the way I think about Mexican culture, the way I think about, Salvadoran culture, the way I think about Vietnamese. I'm not Taiwanese, but I'm Vietnamese, and it's very similar, the way they talk about feeling invisible.
Thanks so much for taking time out of your schedules, guys, to share your story, your experience, and everything you're doing with Boba Guys.
Yeah,
thank you, Felicia. Have a great night.
I've been speaking with Andrew Chau and Bin Chen, the co-founders of Boba Guys. Now it's time for you to show us some love. Rate us on Spotify, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Audible, leave us a review there. It helps others to discover Talking Taiwan. To learn more about any of the items mentioned in this episode, visit our website, talkingtaiwan.com. There we'll list any related links. Thank you for listening to another episode of Talking Taiwan. I'm your host, Felicia Lin.
Talking Taiwan is brought to you by Forumosa.com.